Anika, a quietly discontented housewife, finds herself alone at home one afternoon when her husband Rohit and the rest of the family, including Rohit's sister Mira, go shopping. Mira's husband Aman unexpectedly returns to the house to retrieve his wallet. What begins as a casual, polite interaction between in-laws slowly becomes emotionally charged. The two engage in conversation, revealing small cracks in their respective marriages. Aman confesses to feeling unseen by Mira, while Annika subtly shares her own loneliness. Their words linger longer than they should. Tension builds in the silence that follows, and boundaries blur. A brief, intimate moment escalates into a kiss, followed by a decision neither can take back. Afterward, the weight of what occurred settles in. When the family returns, everything appears normal, but the atmosphere between Aman and Annika is irreversibly altered. They avoid each other, offering no words, no glances. The incident is locked in mutual silence. The next morning, Aman and Mira depart. As they leave, Aman offers a single backward glance, silent acknowledgement of a moment that will never be out. Spoken of again, Annika resumes her life with Rohit, hiding her guilt behind practiced routines and quiet smiles. In her private thoughts, Annika reflects not with drama, but with a haunting sense of stillness. She doesn't call it love, nor even longing. It was a moment of recognition, two people briefly seeing each other in their rawest form. Annika never tells anyone, not her husband, not herself in writing. The memory remains untouched, unnamed, floating, like a sentence never finished. Not every betrayal ends with consequences. Some live on only in silence.
I never imagined a moment of silence could carry so much weight. The house had been filled with chatter just an hour ago. My husband, Rohit, was helping his sister Mira pack snacks for the mall trip. Their voices mingled with the clink of dishes and the occasional burst of laughter. I sat by the window, feigning a headache. Truthfully, I just wanted to be left alone. It wasn't exhaustion. It was a kind of quiet discontent I couldn't name. Rohit kissed my forehead gently before they left, his familiar gesture somehow feeling unfamiliar. "We won't be long," he said, his voice warm but distant. I nodded, managing a small smile. Now, the silence settled around me like a blanket. The only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. I curled up on the sofa with a book, but the words refused to stay on the page. My mind drifted, drawn backward in time. Mira and her husband, Aman, had arrived the night before for a short visit. It had been nearly a year since I last saw him. Back then, our interactions were pleasant but unremarkable. This time, something had shifted, though I couldn't quite define it. I recalled our earlier conversation in the kitchen. I was making tea. Aman stepped in to rinse a glass. We exchanged casual greetings, and then he said something simple. "You look different." I'd brushed it off with a laugh, asking if he meant tired or older. He had smiled. "No, just different." In a good way. It was nothing, or it should have been. Now alone, I found myself replaying that line, his tone, the way his eyes had lingered a fraction longer than expected. I shook the thought away, embarrassed by my own imagination. I wasn't the kind of woman who looked for meaning in passing glances. The front door clicked open. I froze. Footsteps. I stood, heart racing for no clear reason, and stepped toward the hallway. Aman appeared, keys in hand and brow furrowed. "I forgot my wallet," he said, holding it up with a sheepish smile. "They're just reaching the parking lot." I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "You're quick," I said lightly, trying to mask the sudden awkwardness in my posture. He chuckled. "Didn't want to slow everyone down." A man looked relaxed, casually dressed in a pale blue shirt with sleeves rolled just below the elbows. He had always carried himself with a quiet ease. Unlike Rohit, who approached the world with logic and restraint, Aman had a kind of looseness about him, like he was always half listening to music no one else could hear. I was just making tea, I offered. Would you like some? Sure, he replied, walking slowly toward the kitchen. If it's not a bother. I turned on the kettle, acutely aware of how quiet the house felt now, with only the two of us. We stood in the kitchen, not speaking for a moment. The air seemed charged, although nothing had been said or done to warrant it. You always keep the place so neat, Aman said, glancing around. Rohit likes everything in order, I replied. I try to keep up. He looked at me, and I sensed it before he said anything more. That shift again. I meant you, he said, softer now. You seem put together. I met his gaze, then looked away. Looks can be misleading. True, he said. Sometimes what's calm on the surface is just practiced. His words hung between us, not accusatory but observant. I busied myself with pouring the tea. The kettle hissed, the steam rising like something escaping. We moved to the dining table. The silence between us was comfortable this time, or at least less sharp. I wrapped my fingers around the warm ceramic mug and dared to ask, "How are things with Mira?" He paused. Complicated. It was the first honest thing either of us had said all day. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Still, something softened in that exchange, an invisible line shifting closer. The doorbell rang suddenly, jarring the moment. We both looked toward the sound. I guess they forgot something else, I said, standing up. But it was just a delivery. A man answered it while I returned to the living room. I sat back down, my tea now cold, and stared out the window again. The sky had darkened slightly, clouds forming with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He returned, leaned casually against the doorway, watching me. I didn't ask him to join me. He didn't ask to leave. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was waiting. Aman lingered by the doorway, as though unsure if he should stay or step away. I looked at him, searching for some neutral ground in my expression. There was none. My gaze held still, not inviting, but not closing the door either. Mind if I sit? He asked. I shook my head. No. He lowered himself into the armchair across from me. We sat, separated by a small coffee table, yet bound by something neither of us dared to name. The television remained off. Outside, a faint wind rustled the trees. Inside, stillness wrapped itself around us like a second skin. I've always liked the quiet, he said, not looking at me. Most people don't, I replied, clutching my mug again. It tells you the truth, he said after a pause. Noise covers things. Quiet forces you to hear them. I met his eyes. And what do you hear right now? His mouth lifted in a soft, uncertain smile. That we shouldn't be talking like this. There it was. Not quite a confession, not quite a denial. Just a thread dangling between two people who'd drifted closer than they should. I stood and walked to the kitchen, pretending to rinse the already clean mugs. I needed space, but not distance. The contradiction made me dizzy. He followed. Not closely, but enough that I felt the shift in the air behind me. I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable, he said, voice low. You didn't. I lied. A long pause followed. When I turned around, he was watching me again, that unreadable expression on his face. I know things with Mira aren't my business, I said carefully, but you seemed off yesterday. A man sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's been a while since things felt right. We've grown into different people. That happens, I said. To most couples, I think. But not always like this. He paused. It's like living beside someone, not with them, and pretending not to notice. I looked down, unsure how to answer. Part of me wanted to offer comfort, the other part, warning. His honesty pulled something loose in me. That same feeling I'd buried quietly over the years. The ache of being seen but never fully understood. I shouldn't be saying any of this to you, he added. Maybe that's why you're saying it to me, I said quietly. A man took a step closer, and the room seemed to narrow. Every sound faded into the background, the clocks ticking, the wind outside, even the noise of my own thoughts. All that remained was breath, shared and shallow. We could stop this now, he said, more to himself than to me. I nodded. We could. But neither of us moved. He reached up gently, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. His touch was light, cautious, asking, not taking. My skin burned beneath his fingers, a spark long dormant waking in me with quiet. Defiance. I didn't flinch. There was a second, a fragile pause, where everything could have stayed intact. Then his lips found mine. It was a slow kiss, tentative at first, as if both of us needed to feel the full weight of our mistake. I responded, not out of impulse, but out of something deeper, something hollow I hadn't known was there until he filled it. There was no urgency, no violence, only the quiet collapse of two people who should have known better. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Time blurred. The boundaries we'd spent years building collapsed in minutes. I was aware of everything, his breath on, my neck, the tension in my limbs, the unbearable sweetness of feeling wanted. Not as a wife, not as a hostess, but as a woman. And then it was over. We sat on the couch again, but this time we didn't face each other. The silence had changed. It was no longer waiting. It was settling, heavy, real. I stared at the floor, unsure if I felt relief or remorse. Amin rubbed his hands together, then rested his elbows on his knees. He looked like a man who had just said too much at the wrong dinner table. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What was there to say? Outside, the wind had picked up. A gust slammed the balcony door shut. We both startled slightly, pulled back into the world we'd just stepped out of. I should go, he said, rising. I nodded. He didn't look at me again as he left the room. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. I stood alone, heart racing, every breath catching in my throat like a confession I couldn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stood there, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The house was noisy again by late afternoon. The front door swung open to laughter and shopping bags, the chaos of family returning as though nothing had happened. I was in the kitchen, wiping the counter for the third time. My hands moved out, of habit, not intention. My body had returned to its role, but my mind still lingered somewhere between disbelief and denial. Feeling better? Rohit called out as he dropped a paper bag on the dining table. I nodded, managing a smile that felt foreign on my face. Yeah, much better. He walked over and kissed my temple. I closed my eyes at the contact, not out of affection, but guilt. The ease of his love made the burden heavier. Mira began pulling out dresses, twirling them in front of me with excitement. I nodded at all the right moments, laughed where I needed to. Aman walked in last, carrying nothing but his phone. His expression unreadable. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. And just like that, the secret folded itself into the fabric of everyday life. Dinner was loud and long. Mira insisted on setting up the table. Aman sat beside her, occasionally smiling, saying little. Rohit poured wine and teased me gently when I declined a second glass. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but something had cracked underneath. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. Rohit was in bed, scrolling on his phone, his bare feet peeking out from the blanket, his world simple and unchanged. I pressed my fingers to the cool glass and exhaled. A man hadn't said a single word to me all evening. Not a glance, not even the accidental kind. It was as if we had both agreed, without speaking, that the moment between us would be buried beneath layers of silence. And yet, I felt it in the way he walked out of rooms I entered. In the split-second delays before he answered if I happened to speak. In the avoidance so deliberate, it was practically acknowledgement. I should have felt anger, or shame, or even fear. Instead, I felt fragmented, split between the woman who had lived one kind of truth that afternoon, and the woman who now lived in the echo of it. The next morning, Mira and Aman prepared to leave early. Bags were zipped, shoes slid on, casual goodbyes exchanged in the hallway. I stood behind Rohit as he hugged his sister. "Thanks for having us," Aman said, addressing Rohit, not me. I gave a small nod, an automatic farewell. Mira hugged me tightly and whispered something about visiting again soon. Aman didn't say anything. But as they stepped outside and the cab door swung open, he turned, just slightly, and looked back. Just once, not long, not pleading. Just long enough to say everything we weren't allowed to voice. Then they were gone. I stood by the door for a while, unsure whether I was mourning something or grateful to have it behind me. Days passed, then weeks. Life resumed its pace, unchanged on the surface. I cleaned, cooked, laughed, worked, and even argued with Rohit over small things. We kissed before bed. We planned a vacation. But beneath it all, a small space inside me remained hollow, not aching, not even alive, just quiet. I never told anyone, not a friend, not even myself, in the way one might confess something in a journal just to make it real. I chose not to name it. Because naming it would make it exist outside that moment, would stretch it into meaning something more than what it was. And it wasn't love. It wasn't even desire, really. It was the sharp, dangerous clarity of being seen in a moment of weakness and choosing not to look away. There are things you carry not because you want to, but because there is nowhere else for them to go. Sometimes I wonder if Aman thinks about it. If that afternoon crosses his mind the way it crosses mine, briefly, like a shadow moving across the wall. But I'll never ask. He'll never say. It's better that way. Because not every story demands a conclusion. Some remain suspended, unfinished, like an interrupted sentence you never dared to end. And that's exactly where this one belongs.